Today I'm speaking to Nicole from BizLife, and we're going to be chatting all things medical billing. I'm super excited, and I'll introduce you to her in a second. But we really want to start this show, and we want to create value, so we want to hear from you. If you enjoyed the show, or if there's any feedback from your side, please let us know. But this is just our conversation. You have the chance to listen in. So I hope you enjoy it. Over to you, Nicole. Thank you so much for joining today. I know you got a ton of stuff to do and you're super busy and it's Friday. You probably want to get everything done before the weekend starts. Thanks for taking your time to be here.
Thanks.
Why don't we start with you just introducing yourself a little bit, what you do and your journey into medical billing and starting BizLife.
Sure. So the company started with my business partner, Luke, and I. I was working at Discovery at the time, and Luke was working at a bureau that we had both worked at previously. He was unhappy in his company, and I was also unhappy at Discovery. So I approached him and I said, let's see if we can do our own thing. And next year that'll be 10 years ago. So it's worked out pretty well. Yeah.
Wow.
So we're a practice administration company. We specialize in anesthetic billing. That is our speciality, but we do administration for a variety of different practice types. We also do allied health professionals, which a lot of bureaus don't want to do allied health professionals, but we saw a gap in the market to do it for them as well. So yeah.
So Nicole, thank you so much for sharing a bit about how you got started and your origin story. It's interesting. Sometimes people are inspired with something cool they want to chase after, but in your case, it was something you wanted to kind of get away from. But it's a bit of both, probably, I'm sure. Be your own boss, to have your own business. Some days are, I suppose, great. Other days are challenging. You know, it's not easy to work for yourself or have your own business. What has kept you going for 10 years? I mean, that's incredible. It's quite a milestone. Congrats, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is quite a milestone. It's some days are better than others, as you said. I think Luke and I just really wanted freedom and time to raise families and do what we wanted to do without having to report to anyone, really. But the pressure of it is also quite large when you're running a business and you're responsible for staff and their livelihoods. And we're not in the easiest industry either. So it can be challenging at times, yeah.
So what would you say distinguishes BizLife from other businesses in your industry? What makes you guys special? Do you have a unique approach to the way you tackle this business administration for medical practices and anesthesiologists?
Obviously, there's a specific way things need to be handled within this industry that you can't really stray away from the process itself. Our vision in the beginning when we started the business was that we were going to be a very personalized business, and we've stuck with that. So we are very personalized. We go above and beyond the scope of work for our clients, and we know a lot about our clients. We're very involved. So we've taken that approach when we started the business, and we've continued that.
I'm sure that makes quite a difference. What are some of the biggest or most interesting challenges that you find yourself solving for practice owners currently in terms of their billing? And how does BizLife help simplify or overcome those challenges?
The biggest challenge that I think we find is the medical aids, and the medical aids have changed quite a bit over the years, particularly with their exclusions, their sublimits, the tariffs that they pay. The medical aid rates are significantly lower than what the doctors are generally charging, and that affects the whole practice. Just their different plans, their different exclusions, their sublimits. It's just it just creates a lot of logistics around what is covered, what's not going to be covered, and so it does extend like the process of the claim, because especially with other practice types like physiotherapy for example. So for us, the medical aids is a big problem. Yeah, other than that, I think practices struggle with an admin burden. It's a burden on the practice to have this administration, and that's where BizLife comes in, especially for anaesthetists, because they generally don't have rooms. They're roaming doctors most of the time, so they really need somebody to just take all the administration burden away from their practice.
So how would you say BizLife helps them in could you give some practical examples perhaps for us?
Well, if an anaesthetist didn't have BizLife to do their administration, they would have to sit and capture accounts themselves. They would have to build their accounts. They would have to submit their accounts. Then they would have to make sure that the account goes through smoothly, which doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes it does go smoothly, and that's great. But other times it's rejected for this reason, or the authorization, there's a problem, or they're waiting for the surgeon's account. So it's not just as cut and dry as it might seem. There are things that can go wrong that you weren't expecting. So they don't have the time to do that. They're in theater all the time. And it would be a huge burden for them to do it themselves. It's a lot that goes into it. Yeah.
So a huge time. Let's call it there's a lot of time that you have to spend to get these things right. It seems like. Time suck is the word
As I
I'm looking
said,
for.
yeah. So sometimes it goes smoothly and things are great. But there are times where there's a very complicated case, and the medical aid rejects it for whatever reason. They're coming up with all sorts of new reasons to reject claims these days.
New reasons,
Yeah. All new reasons not to pay.
Because they're really in the business of making money. Yeah. Making money, keeping money for themselves for the most part.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow. Okay. No, this is cool. So you've touched on what has changed in the medical industry, especially regarding medical aids, how their regulation and things are changing. Is there anything else that you've noticed over the last couple of years that's different to, let's say, 5 years ago, that has completely changed the game?
For us, there's been a change. I see a lot of group practices joining forces, whereas before it was individual practices running on their own. I see a lot of group practices emerging where 4 or 5 anaesthetists are getting together and creating a sort of a group practice, and they're operating that way. The other thing that has obviously changed is the implementation of the NHI, or the potential implementation of the NHI. That has been a huge cloud over our heads. So that, I would say, is probably currently the biggest thing we are facing in the medical industry.
What are some of the implications, or at least expected implications, of the NHI at the moment, or the biggest fears that you have? How could that hamstring either yourselves or medical practice owners?
I actually did an interview with a market research company that's doing some market research on the NHI the other day, and there's a 2-part concern with the NHI. The first is that a lot of the practitioners or specialists, I feel, are not going to go for it, and they're going to immigrate. That is what the first concern is that they are just going to find work elsewhere. We have already, maybe not necessarily in relation to the NHI, but 2 of our clients have already immigrated, one to Canada and one to Australia. So the opportunities for specialists overseas is massive. And, with the NHI looming, I feel like they would consider immigration over adhering to the rules of the NHI. The second concern is that it's extremely vague. There is no definite answers. There's so many questions that are not answered. And I don't know how it's going to implicate the industry. And I think that's the scariest thing, is that there's so many questions unanswered. We just don't have a definitive idea of how it's going to affect us all, because it's going to affect us all in a different way. And yeah, that's a huge concern.
If the government is making it so hard for private practice owners to make a living, they're just going to say, we're out of here. This is too much admin, too much red tape, and too much uncertainty is what I'm hearing. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I would also say that they've also not specified how they're going to structure it. They haven't said how much of the doctor's time is going to be dedicated to the NHI, how much are they going to have to sacrifice their private practice. Especially like an anaesthetist, the studying and the process to get into private practice it's crazy. And for them to now say, okay, you need to dedicate 80% of your time to the NHI and only 20% of your time to private practice, I don't see anybody wanting to do that. I don't see anybody wanting to go for that. After all those years of studying and working in government hospitals, I just don't see it happening. So I think they would immigrate. Yeah.
So for those who don't know or aren't as familiar, I'm sure most of the people in the medical industry do know, but just for those viewers that aren't as familiar with the landscape, how would you describe what the NHI is or proposes to be, and what are their demands, as vague as they might be? What do we know about the NHI?
What I know about the NHI is it's an insurance fund that is going to cover certain procedures in private hospitals for the general public. We're going to be taxed for that, which is obviously the claims are going to then run through the NHI fund. So I'm not too sure who's familiar with like a workman's compensation fund. But if somebody is injured on duty, then we submit it to the Workman's Compensation Fund. And sometimes they can take up to 2-3 years to pay a claim. So if we're looking at the same sort of structure as the Workman's Compensation Fund for the NHI, we're looking at a huge backlog of claims and a huge backlog of claims being paid to the practices. But they have not specified what procedures are being covered under the NHI, what rate is being covered, which practice types are being covered. It's just very vague. They have not been specific enough for people to feel comfortable with it. And yeah, just the strain on the healthcare system in general, if that does be implemented, is going to be massive. It's going to be massive.
Sounds to me like there's this ripple effect of consequences that people just aren't ready for, and companies even aren't ready for, and hospitals aren't ready for.
Agreed. It's a massive undertaking that they have not. I don't think they have properly considered this ripple effect that you've just mentioned. The hospitals are going to be under so much strain. They are already. We don't have a proper healthcare system to begin with. If we had a proper healthcare system for the public healthcare system in place, and you then wanted to add on with an NHI fund, that's one thing. But we don't have a proper public healthcare system to begin with. And now we're going to go and strain the private healthcare system. And then don't get me wrong, I do feel that all should have access to good healthcare. That's not what I'm saying. But it just doesn't seem like they have researched enough how it's going to affect all the individual role players in the industry. And that's they just concerning themselves with providing healthcare for everyone, which yes, I agree. But they have not properly researched all the different role players.
Besides giving access to healthcare to, let's say, the majority of South Africa, which seems to be one of the goals, what other incentives might be driving this whole NHI concern and campaign or initiative? Do you think? Who's going to benefit from this really, besides the public?
I don't even think the public is going to benefit from it, to be honest. I really don't. I think it's going to crumble the healthcare system in general. I don't think the public is going to even benefit from it. And even if people are on medical aid today, when I was talking about the changes of the medical aid and the shortfalls, people are paying out of their pocket, even though they're on a medical aid. I just recently, as just an example, calculated my out-of-hospital medical expenses, specifically maybe for medication and doctor's visits that weren't covered by the medical aid. And it came to 9,000 Rand for the last financial period. But I'm on a medical aid. So for me personally, if I was involved in the structure of the NHI or the building of the NHI or whatever, I would look at the Medical Aid Schemes Act to start, because that's where the problem lies, is that the medical aids are not, they're just not coming to the party when it comes to healthcare for the public. There aren't enough plans that cater for low-income people. As I said, there are exclusions, there are sublimits, the this, the that. It's just... So before we even start with the NHI, I feel like the current system, the way it is, needs to be changed first. So to answer your question, it's only going to benefit those that are receiving the tax that we're paying for it.
It certainly seems that way, it's almost scarily obvious that this is potentially a money-making scheme, just to get even more tax and potentially cream off the top of whatever those transactions might be. Because would you agree that it seems like the medical industry is somewhat broken because of these really high, the way I've seen it, a lot of medical aids, you get a medical aid rate, and it's often like maxing out whatever they can get. It's not built for affordability. It's not necessarily built for helping more people get access to health. It seems to be built on potentially even greed. At least that's been my observation. Would you say that's accurate, or am I somewhat misguided?
No, it's definitely accurate. I just feel like there's no middle ground with the medical aids and the public health care. There's a huge gap. You're either going to go to a government hospital and potentially not receive the proper healthcare that you need because you can't afford a medical aid, or you're on a medical aid and you're going to go to a private hospital and still end up, okay, not everybody, those that are on the high end plans probably won't end up with any shortfalls, but those in the lower plans are still going to end up with bills. So it's just a massive problem all around. It's just not working all around. And the hospitals are also just don't come to the party either. They've also got co-payments that they want paid up front and those kind of things. So yeah, it's a huge problem.
Yeah. I mean, I've been listening to a gentleman by the name, he's an American guy, quite influential, but he's very wealthy, and his name is Scott Galloway, and he said basically he cancelled all his medical aid and all those things and his medical insurance, because he's at a place where he could pretty much take care of all the most medical issues. So it seems to me like people who are super wealthy would not, I don't think, subscribe to these kind of medical aid plans. They would just put money away, and then when something happens, they can just pay for it. But there seems to be like this middle ground, let's call it the middle class, that I seem to see are being taken for a ride, as much as possible is being milked out of them. And that's what I'm saying. It seems like there's some incentives here just to max out on the most money that can be made. And the other side, like you said, is this chasm where there are, lower income people who then have to go to, sit at a government hospital. I've been there. I've seen, yes, maybe there are some competent doctors and medical, the actual treatment is sufficient, but you sit there for days, and very few people who are already on, low income can afford to go sit somewhere for days until hopefully they get some help. And it's really tragic. It's an injustice, really. But yeah, there's some big challenges right there. Perhaps we can shift gears because we might just get depressed because it's a big challenge.
Yeah.
Could we look quickly at, in the time we have available, could we look at maybe your observations? You said that you've seen quite a vast array of businesses that you know, and medical practices and specialists that you work with. Are there any significant differences between, let's say, a smaller practice and the larger practices? Are there unique problems to these two subgroups, or are the problems pretty much, or problems, challenges, whatever, more or less the same?
I think the challenges are more or less the same because it's an industry challenge. It's not a. Having said that, though, obviously all different practice types have their own challenges. As I said, like a physiotherapist in hospital doing physiotherapy is very complicated. But I think it's an industry challenge, not a specific practice challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like it's more systemic than per practice. In terms of the actual admin and the work for BizLife, is there a huge difference in the workload of a large practice versus a smaller practice?
Not necessarily, no. I would say it depends more on the practice type. For example, I have a speech therapist. Her practice is very involved. It's very time consuming, and it's not a massive practice at all. But it's very time consuming. So I don't think it has to do with small, large. I think it's got to do with the practice type specifically. Anaesthetists are, there are a lot of rules and regulations around the billing, but the process of the claim is quite simple. So I don't think it's small versus large. I think it's definitely the different practice types.
That makes sense. So you've mentioned that there are some rules and regulations, especially with certain disciplines. How would you say you ensure compliance with these ever-changing healthcare regulations and the billing codes? And, how do you keep up with those things? And how do you keep clients updated?
We work with the SAMA guide. It's the South African Medical Association guide. So if we have any sort of billing that we feel like, oh, we don't know if we can charge this or can we charge this with that, we refer to the SAMA guide. But in terms of the medical aids, they are quite good at updating us as a bureau and the clients on any things that may have changed. In terms of billing, we don't really get information about if they've changed something on a membership plan specifically. That would then fall within the patient's responsibility realm to know what their plans are. And just to mention, that's also another thing that's a big problem for us and for the industry is that patients don't understand how their plans work. They think because they're on a medical aid, everything involved with that procedure is going to be covered in full, and it's not necessarily that way. So the patient knowledge of their plans and how it works is also a huge problem. I've actually thought of doing maybe like a one-day course or something like that for patients to ask questions because they really don't, the medical aids are not forthcoming with information on how the plans work and what's covered and what's not, because they obviously don't really care necessarily if the patient has a shortfall. But it's a huge problem. Patients are very ignorant, for the want of a better word, about what is actually covered under their medical aid membership. So we work on the SAMA guide, but the medical aids do also send us a lot of updates on codes that are discontinued or if we need to change this. So yeah, we do keep up to date with everything that is going on. But I must say there's not a lot of changes that happen regularly. It's not like every month we're getting another change. It's maybe every financial year they might look at something different. Yeah.
Got it. Great. Thanks, Nicole. Let's, I think, end off this conversation with one last question. And then, we can wrap. Just want to check, to circle back to something you just said. Did you say, or did you mean that you would actually present a course, or would you take a course somewhere else for yourself? Or is it for, giving a course to help patients understand their medical aid options and things like that?
Yeah, I would say giving a course. I would be happy to
giving a course,
or not even a course, just an online conversation. Yeah, it makes everyone's lives difficult in this process of claiming and medical billing. It makes everyone's lives a lot more difficult if a patient doesn't understand what their membership consists of. We get patients all the time saying, "Oh, but I thought this was covered," and "Oh, but I thought, this was going to be fine." And it's, even though at the hospital they do receive documents explaining it all and explaining the rates, and, our clients give them consent forms that they need to fill in and sign. A lot of the time they don't really read it. They're just signing it and give it back. But when they're joining medical aids, they just don't, the medical aids or the brokers even are not explaining properly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can totally believe that.
So I'd be happy to.
Most people don't read
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be super valuable. And if you want to co-host something or whatever, but I would spread the word because I think that would be so helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And good for you.
Definitely.
I look forward to seeing that. Maybe let's finish off on this one. Do you have any advice for new or small private practices or individuals or specialists, especially anaesthetists that you said you work with, struggling with their billing processes? Any advice, obviously, besides working with you guys, with BizLife? Any other sort of tips that you would want to part with to help in general?
A lot of our clients were registrars when they first started with us, which means that they were still doing their work in state hospitals, and they were doing some of the private practice work as well. And that was our main target market in the beginning, was to help registrars start their private practice, which we actually thoroughly enjoy because it's rewarding to see a practice that has just started out now, and all of our registrars are now in full-time private practice, it's nice to see that. The advice I would give, you need to have somebody who knows what they're doing. It's very easy to mess this up. So if you don't have the knowledge and experience of the industry, it's risky. But other than that, a good software that you're using to make sure that your claims are submitted in real time and things like that is also something I would say is something to look at. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I know you didn't want to recommend any specific software at this point, but perhaps that's something we can revisit later. We can maybe review some software that you have experience in if you wanted to. But thank you so much, Nicole. It's been super helpful and valuable chatting to you. I really appreciate it.